Welcome to Linked Heritage, a podcast about museums and Wikipedia. I'm Bea, and I'll be taking you through the intersections and relationships between the Free Encyclopedia and the world of heritage, whether that be digital heritage, museums, or world heritage. Wikipedia, the Free Encyclopedia, is known as the most popular source of information on the internet, and it's home to a wealth of knowledge specifically about heritage, all brought together by editors around the world from other sources like books, news, websites, and more. We're about to explore the stories of this website's attempts to reach out and touch the world of heritage, which haven't always been successful. From budding Wikipedia editors to the website's power players, and from the originator of the Wikipedian in residence to the creator of the Museum of All Things, we'll be joined by a variety of interviewees from across the GlamWiki community, where galleries, libraries, archives, and museums work alongside the Wikimedia Foundation's countless grassroots projects and initiatives. Can Wikipedia influence heritage, and can they work together? Could we call Wikipedia itself heritage? Episode 3. Can Wikipedia and heritage work together? This episode, we're getting a little further into the weeds of Wikipedia and heritage. While the website is an incredible way for people to learn about the world for free, there's a host of issues that need to be dealt with on the website, especially when it comes to biases. Part 1. Who are the women in red? If you're listening to this podcast right now, it's pretty likely that you're a Wikipedia editor. If that's true, it's also likely that you're many other things too. You pretty definitely have access to the internet, and you use the internet frequently. You're likely to be relatively well educated, you probably live in the global north, and you most likely have white skin. In all likelihood, you're a young male. The articles about things near you are probably written in your local language, which is something that can't be said for many others around the world. This is systemic bias, and initiatives involving Wikipedia need to actively work hard toward improving Wikipedia to make it more inclusive. One of these initiatives is Women in Red, a wiki project that's directly called out this systemic bias and is working to, as they say on their central page, move the needle in terms of statistical representation of women and other gender minorities on Wikipedia. It all started back in 2015 and was named after the red hyperlinks on Wikipedia that show an article hasn't yet been created. Recently, it celebrated that it had brought the proportion of biographies about women on Wikipedia up to 20%, after starting a decade ago at 15%. Progress is slow in the grand scheme of things, but it's still progress. In June 2018, Women in Red even spent a month to focus on women in glam, adding articles on librarians, curators, and other museum people. Editathons have been another way to improve these statistics. These are events often held at GLAM institutions where everyone works together at once to improve a certain aspect of Wikipedia, whether that be improving a page to the best possible quality, adding tons of images from an institution's archives, or improving the quality of back-end wiki data. While editathons started out with similar demographics to Wikipedia itself, many of them have begun to focus on the stark disparity in the representation of women on the website. And they're great at bringing new editors into the fold while helping them participate in heritage at the same time. So, one way out of the bias we see on Wikipedia seems to be fostering the participation of its volunteers, especially through these editathon events. But there's one type of Wikipedian who might also be able to help, and it's the type that makes the editathons happen in the first place. Part 2. Could Wikipedians in residence solve the issue? Matthew Cock was the website manager of the British Museum in 2009. He was browsing page views on Wikipedia and found that the page for the Rosetta Stone had been viewed on Wikipedia 5 times more than the British Museum's own website. And if you can't beat them, join them. Matthew decided to propose a new idea to the administrators of the museum, a Wikipedia contributor who could communicate with Wikipedia's editors and act as a liaison between them and the museum. He expected pushback, but the idea was instead embraced by the museum, and he invited Liam Wyatt, also known as user Witty Llama, who had practically begun Wikipedia's relationship with GLAMS to be the very first Wikipedian in residence.
I'm Liam Wyatt, username Witty Llama on the English Wikipedia and all other Wikimedia projects. I'm an Australian who, through my work and in undergraduate studies on the historiography of Wikipedia, ended up creating the GlamWiki world, the Wikiverse, known as GlamWiki, and becoming the world's first Wikipedian in residence at the British Museum in 2010.
This relatively new type of Wikipedia editor works at an organisation like a university, art gallery, library, archive or museum to encourage contributions to Wikipedia that line up with the goals of that organisation.
So Wikipedian in residence, the idea is that it would be someone in-house in a cultural institution based on the idea of the artist in residence, of course, where they would be free to pursue their expertise and skills using the equipment and access and expertise of the institution to be able to bring those two fields together for mutual benefit.
While in London for just 5 weeks, Liam worked with the museum's staff and volunteer editors of Wikipedia to use the British Museum's resources to improve Wikipedia's coverage. He started the Hoxton Challenge, pushing editors to bring the article on the Hoxton Hoard, the largest cache of late Roman silver and gold ever discovered in Britain, from a stub, the lowest possible quality of an article, up to featured article status, the highest quality assessment an article can have, in just 1 week. Here, he established the practice of editathons, engagement events with GLAM institutions to improve content on Wikipedia, as well as the idea of a backstage pass for editors to get tours of institutions behind the scenes.
In about 2009, there was an interesting moment in the history of Wikimedia. I had just finished my undergraduate thesis in the historiography of Wikipedia, that is how the future's historians will use us as a primary source to discover how this period of time talked about itself, because we're trying to write about ourselves in a neutral and tertiary source way. And so I was very involved in the community in both an academic and a practical, it's also my hobby, and was working for the Dictionary of Sydney, which was the professional encyclopedia of the history of Sydney at the time as well. So this was both my day job and my hobby and my academic work, and I was very involved in that work. I was also doing the podcast, Wikipedia Weekly, at the time as well. Wikimania, the conference in Alexandria that year, came around, and we were there interviewing people, and the conference was held at the Library of Alexandria. And we got a tour behind the scenes of their digitization lab and their various work trying to provide open cultural heritage access to this fabulous collection they have, modern collection that they have, including scanning of Arabic text and so forth. And that really inspired us that we should be doing more work with professional cultural heritage institutions who were somewhat ambivalent in general as an institutional sector. And so were we. Both the Wikimedian community in general was standoffish. This is the old school, this is the ivory tower who's not letting us in, who's not letting us play. And equally, the cultural sector is concerned about our quite libertarian approach to copyright, to presumably concerns about authenticity and obviously expertise, the usual kind of concerns about crowdsourcing, what if there's mistakes and so forth. And this is in a period where Wikipedia is not yet like top of the pops in its visibility. It hasn't reached its peak yet, but it's still very well known. But it's the kind of time when Wikipedia is consistently banned in schools, for example. It's, you don't trust it, don't trust Wikipedia. Ironically, that's now completely the other way around because we're the last human thing left after the AI bots have taken over. But at the time, this is the non-trustworthy face of the non-trustworthy internet. So why would a cultural heritage institution that's all about trust want to talk to us? At that time, particularly in the UK, there were institutions more actively, not just ambivalent, but actively hostile towards Wikimedia, notably the National Portrait Gallery. A Wikimedian had been reverse engineering their high resolution images of public domain paintings. And this is a policy of our community that you don't get new copyright just by scanning a painting in high quality. In fact, all you're doing is deliberately removing any artistic interpretation that you might have. It's not a new artwork, it's an old artwork. You've just digitized it. So therefore, you don't get any copyright, in our opinion, and various cultural institutions who've spent a lot of money on doing that disagree. And so the National Portrait Gallery threatened to sue a Wikimedian in North America who had been doing that to their collection. Myself and a few others happened to be in London, and so we went and visited them secretly. They brought us in through a back door, an underground tunnel, and spoke to us. And basically, the result is, there is no winner here trying to sue a volunteer on the internet for putting things on an encyclopedia. That's not helpful. So that went away over time without an acknowledgement of wrongdoing on anyone's behalf. But at the time, myself and a colleague, Mike Peel, who was with the Wikimedia UK chapter on the board at the time, and is right now on the board of trustees of the Wikimedia Foundation, about to step off after his term has expired. And we went around to a lot of institutions in London while I happened to be there and just said, hey, we're here, we're humans, we have a bunch of things we could do together. Don't sue us, but actually there's things we could collaborate with. It was a strange time in that random volunteers on the internet could walk into major cultural institutions in London and say, hello, we're from the internet, and they would take our call. They would take the meeting. We went around and one of those institutions that we presented to about how Wikimedia works was the British Museum. We spoke to the IT department under the direction of a fellow called Xerxes Mazda and the director of web, Matthew Cock. And 6 months later, I got an email from the senior director in British Museum saying, we have done a risk assessment and we will permit you to volunteer for us, which was not what I had offered necessarily. But I was back at home in Australia at the time and said, okay, well, that's pretty cool. I think I need to do that. So I quit my job and moved to London for 6 weeks and lived on a friend's couch in East Acton from high school who was living there at the time, and tried to do as many things as I could in the space of time that I had to prove that this was a viable relationship. It wasn't long-term, it wasn't paid. Many Wikipedian in residence projects these days are. So I did that for 6 weeks. Wikimania came around. It was in Poland that year, in Gdansk, and I presented about our work at the end of that period. And the rest is history. I spent the following year or so going around to cultural heritage conferences, being invited around. They would pay travel, but not food. And I would just sort of spruik what I'd done and say, this is a thing, there is momentum here, there is possibility. For the phrase that I would consistently use, we're doing the same thing for the same people, for the same reason, often the same medium. We should be doing it together, even if we don't have exactly overlapping rules of engagement. That doesn't mean that we're not able to work with each other in a lot of ways.
I asked Liam what a Wikipedian in residence program really needs to work.
So the requirements to make a Wikipedian in residence program thrive are the same kind of requirements that any in residence program would require. The resident needs to be able to work independently and operate widely across the institution or with the available materials or expertise or locations, whatever it is that that institution has. It might be an arboretum, it might be a children's museum, it might be the archival collections of a broadcasting organization. The nature of the collection or the institution itself determines a lot of the scope of work available, but that kind of collection could be hugely various. And also the kinds of roles and functions that institution has. It could be commercial, could be non-commercial, could be national, could be regional, could be an open air heritage, recreation museum. So it's not about original objects in glass cases, or it could be the reverse. And so that means the person coming in has to be flexible and has to be able to work across the breadth of what that institution has to offer and identify the thing that that institution has flexibility in, has space to play with. Every institution will have constraints. They might be financial, they might be political, they might be legal. Copyright is an obvious one. But they will also have areas that they are more free to play with because, for example, some parts of the collection, they don't want to show off too much what they are because they're potentially, maybe they're temporary borrowed things. They're not owned by the institution. They're only on temporary loan. And so the institution doesn't really have the right to retell their stories as much. On the other hand, they might have things that are indeed their own, so they can play with those. In the British Museum case, that's what I focused on. There's lots of collection items that are controversial based on their acquisition history. I didn't talk about them. I talked about stuff that was Roman Britain primarily, where the entire collection, in particular case, the Hoxne hoard, Hoxne, was a Roman jewelry and coin collection that was entirely in the collection of the British Museum. It wasn't split across multiple institutions, and all of the expertise and all of the history of that hoard was at the British Museum. All of the people who had studied it were at the British Museum. And so it was easier for them to work with that. And it was easier for us to work with that because it was clearly relevant for Wikipedia's purposes, but the content already on Wikipedia was bad, was low quality. It was a win-win. So that's point one. A Wikipedian residents would need to be able to work across the breadth of the collection, be flexible, and play with the things that are easy. You don't have to go find the hardest thing and chip away at that. Find the easy thing and work on that. Get easy wins, low-hanging fruit. The second thing is they need a champion. They need the right to be able to do this. They need to be invited in by someone, and it's a person. This is not institutional. This is not legal. This is not contractual. This is personal. It doesn't matter what your job contract says on paper. It matters how it actually plays out in reality, who is supporting you, who your boss is, and your willingness to work with them. So having a champion, having the person who will have your back, who thinks the idea of the project is valuable and viable and exciting, is more important even than having the contract that is on paper and signed by the Director General of the institution or whatever. The day-to-day leadership of someone who cares and recognizes the value is hugely important. In my case, that was Matthew Cock, the head of web at the British Museum at the time. He's no longer there, but that made it possible to join the institution for that period of time, to be able to take that leap of faith in me and me in them, and to give me the protection as well as exposure to the rest of the institution. And thirdly, you need the person doing the work needs to have the respect of the community that they're representing. You can't come in as a representative of trying to bridge two kinds of organizations, two kinds of cultures, and not have some degree of credibility within the institution that you're coming from. There's no such thing as an accreditation process. We talked about it a few years later when there were more and more Wikipedians and residents appearing and self-appointing, like I did, whether we should create some kind of council, some kind of stamp of approval, which would give that formality, which would have some advantages, but more disadvantages. It would stifle the kind of flexibility that enabled my project to start in the first place. So there is, and remains to this day, a lot of flexibility, but particularly in the Western European and Northern American communities, there's chapters, there's Wikimedia organizations in the local jurisdictions who will assist. There's lots of built up networks of people who've done this before and cultural organizations who've had one before, academic programs, universities that have used this as part of their graduate trainee program, for example. Being part of those, and especially having some kind of expertise already as a Wikimedian, gives you the right to then be the bridge between these two kinds of organizations with legitimacy, rather than walking in cold saying, I'd like to learn about museums. Oh, and I'd also like to learn about Wikipedia. You can't be an in-resident potter of a pottery studio without some expertise in pottery. The exception to that is that it's also possible, particularly in libraries, for a professional librarian who is trained as a librarian as part of their job, they can come onto Wikipedia and be the ambassador for their institution on Wikimedia projects, or Wikidata as well is also quite common. And that's fine. It's less common, but it's ideally, in my original thought for the Wikipedian Residence project, it shouldn't just be one person becoming a permanent job where they get paid and that's now they're the Wikipedian in the room. Rather, it should be their job to train all of the staff, particularly those staff that have public-facing roles, the kind of role that would have to, as part of their job, respond to telephone calls and emails from the public, well, then they should be able to do that on Wikipedia as well. And that spreads that expertise. And so a desire, in my opinion, of spreading the knowledge and the expertise rather than trying to gatekeep is an important part of the project that allows for flexibility and growth and spreading of the institutional understanding in both directions. More people in the Wikimedia side of the world need to understand how the cultural heritage sector works and vice versa, rather than just becoming the linchpin through whom everything has to go. That doesn't scale, that doesn't grow the network.
I also asked him what has happened since he was a Wikipedian in residence and where he is today.
Being the Wikipedian residence at the British Museum in 2010 and running the first 3 Glam Wiki conferences in around that time, 1 before and 2 after, that made my career. That is defined my career. It wasn't necessarily for everyone, but because it was the first, because I made it that way, that has certainly changed my life a lot. It's only in the last couple of years that I've been able to get a job that doesn't have the word Glam Wiki in it. Subsequently, everything has revolved around that. And it's been great. I then, as mentioned, ran several conferences about this is what Glam Wiki is. More people can be involved in it. There's a lot of scope for relationships here. I then worked as the Glam Fellowship at the Wikimedia Foundation for 6 months to spread that gospel back in the day when there was no one, there was no thing. So I was given a contract to say, okay, train our movement, go and explain what could be done here, come up with some recommendations. One of those recommendations was the Wikimedia Foundation should hire a Glam coordinator, manager person. That got filled like 10 years later, and is another Australian who lives in London. I moved to Europe with my wife and worked for Europeana, which is the sort of cultural heritage network institution funded by the European Commission, as their Wikimedian in-house. So this is the organization that collects cultural heritage digitization work of different museums and libraries and galleries across the continent and makes them interoperable, more or less. And now I work for the Wikimedia Foundation directly, based back in the UK, where I'm working these days. I worked for a citation support project called WikiCite for a while, just as a contractor. And now full-time, I work for the project called Wikimedia Enterprise, which is a high-scale commercial institutions who are using Wikimedia content, think search engines, AI, and so forth. This is the relatively recently created commercial project of the Wikimedia movement to make those high-volume institutions pay us for their infrastructural usage rather than our donors subsidizing their business model because of the high volume of requests and infrastructural requirements they place upon us. Now, that seems irrelevant, but ironically, my job title now is technical partnerships. And I'm not an engineer or technical, quote unquote, but the job is the same. We're doing the same thing for different reasons, for the same medium. We have things in common. We have things that don't match. We have a relationship that we know exists, and we can't afford to not have that relationship. Doesn't mean we agree on everything, but we still do have a symbiotic relationship here. That's the same. And so my expertise or my history in working with and talking to cultural institutions about us and talking to us about cultural institutions and where we can work together and where we should leave each other be is remarkably similar and has a consistent thread. So now I talk to large commercial organizations, AI companies, search engines, and so forth, about how Wikimedia works and vice versa. And we try and bring what they need from us, what they would like from us, and say, actually, we can do that, or no, we can't do that. That's not how our values or how our editorial process works. And that credibility, I'm now able to use again, talking to our community and say, look, yes, I know we have an ambivalent relationship to big tech companies in Silicon Valley. Doesn't mean we have to like them and everything they do, but we do need them and they also need us. Same conversation from the Glams back in the day. First conversation from the Glams was, okay, how can you make our Wikipedia article about our institution better for us? I'm like, how about better for both of us?
So, Wikipedia can work with heritage institutions. It just needs people who are willing to bridge the gap. While the efforts of Wikipedia's past to try and become digital heritage itself may have been a little far-fetched, Wikipedians in residence today are an entirely different story. These professionals take the best parts of both sides, the experience and know-how of the heritage professional, and the community-mindedness and grassroots organising of the committed Wikipedia editor. So, Wikipedia can work with heritage institutions. It just needs people who are willing to bridge the gap. While the efforts of Wikipedia's past to try and become digital heritage itself may have been a little far-fetched, Wikipedians in residence today are an entirely different story. These professionals take the best parts of both sides, the expertise and know-how of the heritage professional and the community-mindedness and grassroots organising of the committed Wikipedia editor. Wikipedia as a whole is experiencing a bit of turbulence right now. Billionaire Elon Musk has ferociously campaigned against the site's existence, and far-right think tank the Heritage Foundation has planned to target specific editors for editing about what is widely considered a genocide in Gaza. It's also dealing with the nuances and dangers of artificial intelligence, as well as the impact of the Online Safety Act in the UK, which could lead to limitations on the freedom of information that the site provides. Museums in the Western world are experiencing issues especially with funding, visitor engagement, and political takeovers, such as the Trump administration's push for oversight over cultural institutions. It's possible that banding together with museums is just what Wikipedians need to do to weather the storm. Over these 3 episodes, we've had a look at whether Wikipedia could be considered heritage, whether Wikipedia could influence heritage, and whether Wikipedia and heritage could work together for something new. What we've found is that the answers to all 3 of those questions are yes, with an asterisk. Wikipedia can become recognised heritage, and has the support to do so, even being able to be made into a digital museum itself, but heritage institutions like UNESCO need to modernise their policy to let them in. Wikipedia can influence heritage like encyclopedias influenced the Natural History Museum 100 years ago, but this influence needs to be balanced with expert guidance and doesn't have to be as direct and literal as it was. Wikipedia and heritage can work together to improve each other, but only if the people, Wikipedians and heritage professionals alike, work together and get directly involved in all of the initiatives I've described to make that collaboration a reality. If we really want linked heritage, we need to make those links ourselves. Thank you for listening to this final episode of Linked Heritage, a podcast about museums and Wikipedia. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced by B. Campbell. Thank you to Liam Wyatt for being my interviewee, and again, thank you for listening.